and discussions over Brexit are close to a breakdown, with the possibility of reaching a deal highly unlikely unless Northern Ireland remains in the EU. Now, that's according to a Downing Street source, as reported by the BBC. It comes fresh on the heels of a report published by an independent think tank that said a no-deal Brexit could skyrocket national debt to levels unseen in over half a century. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, total borrowing by the British state could take up 90% of GDP if Britain left the EU without a deal. There is now less than a month left to strike a Brexit withdrawal deal before the looming October 31st deadline. For more, let's cross over to Ollie Barrett. He joins us live from London. Ollie, is there any chance of a Brexit deal? London's now saying that talks are collapsing.
It doesn't look good at all at this stage. If the call between British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, earlier today went the way that Downing Street says it did, then it does appear that the two sides are very far apart indeed, and those talks are effectively collapsing in front of our eyes. Downing Street insisting that Angela Merkel says that Northern Ireland, part of the UK, would have to stay in a European customs union as part of any deal that could be reached between Brussels and London. Well, London insists that is simply not acceptable, isn't going to fly, and therefore that would lead you to believe that we are pretty far off from reaching any kind of deal. Donald Tusk, the European Council president, accusing Boris Johnson on Twitter of playing a stupid blame game, and certainly a blame game is underway, with both sides wanting to avoid as much blame as possible and heap it on the other side if and when those talks do indeed collapse. We should say the European Union insists that the talks are still ongoing and haven't yet collapsed, and certainly in fraught EU negotiations over the years we have seen things appearing to be as bad as they can possibly get before a breakthrough is made, but certainly that would be an optimistic way to look at how things are playing out right now.
Ollie, we were already on thin ice before. It feels like the ice is almost cracking here. Does this mean that we are heading for a no-deal Brexit?
Well, if talks do collapse, then the British government says the UK will leave the European Union on October the 31st without a deal. So that would suggest that we are heading towards that no-deal Brexit scenario. But you'll remember that British MPs have passed legislation which is designed to mandate Boris Johnson to go to the European Union to seek an extension if he hasn't got a deal by October the 19th. So unless Boris Johnson and his acolytes do have some clever way of getting around that legislation that's been passed by the UK's House of Commons, he may well find himself forced into asking for an extension. That would lay the ground for a general election here in the UK, during which Boris Johnson and his party would campaign for Brexit, for delivering Brexit in the face of what they will describe as opposition from a Remain Parliament. And certainly an election is coming up at some point in the not too distant future in the UK. The timing still remains unclear, but we are starting to see the ground laid for the shape of the election campaign that is coming down the tracks.
Ollie, thank you very much for that update. We've been speaking there to Ollie Barrett in London.